but I'm willing to go first because when we get vulnerable, when we expose our junk and reveal God's goodness and glory and all those things, it is powerful. It gives other people permission. It takes people out of isolation and out of shame and hiding and secrecy. And so I want to do for someone what I needed.
Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is a show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello again, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, follow, and share it with your family and friends. Today on the podcast, I'm welcoming Manda Carpenter. She's a neighbor, question asker, and cheerleader of the underdog who spends her days writing, speaking, and advocating. She's been married to her husband for nearly 8 years, and together they have a son and also have been foster parents to 16 kids before him. Manda hosts a Longer Table podcast, one that I absolutely love, by the way, and her newest book is called Soul Care to Save Your Life, of which we'll be discussing in today's episode. Specifically today, we'll be discussing how to transform your life through tending to your soul in a way that requires vulnerability and grace, something Manda became intimately familiar with after confessing the biggest mistake of her life. Through her intentional soul care practices and a lot of grace, she was able to climb out of darkness and find the light once again. In this conversation, we'll also be discussing relevant cultural topics for engaging in today's world in a healthy and productive way, and other topics too. It feels like we covered so much in this episode in a short period of time, and I can't wait for you to listen in. I'm really excited for you to hear from Manda today too, because she's someone I've followed for quite a while already, and I feel like we have a lot in common in our work and platforms. In fact, when I was first embarking on my own journey in the social justice space, I couldn't find anyone doing anything similar to what I had set out to do, and thus it made it that much more difficult to find clarity in the path I was forging ahead. And it wasn't until about 2 to 3 years into this work that I stumbled upon Manda. Finally, I had found someone doing things a little differently than your mainstream influencers and online educators. As you'll hear in her story, our work is certainly different from each other, but we share a lot of common threads too. For that reason, I'm extra excited for you to hear from Manda today. She's someone I admire greatly and look to for adding a healthy dose of sound wisdom and intentionality in life. I think you'll feel the same. Here's my conversation with Manda. Manda, thank you so much for joining me on the Love Light Stories podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's so exciting to be here with you. I feel like we're really across the table from each other.
Yes, yes, exactly. Me too. And you've been someone that I've wanted to have on the show. And because I've watched what you've been doing and followed all of your work for quite a few years now. And I just love what you do and the type of topics you talk about, the social justice issues, the foster care, all of that. And so before we dive into the rest of the conversation, can you just help us understand the work that you do a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, it was easy when I was a public school teacher. I could just be like, I'm a teacher, and everyone knows what that means. We've all had a teacher. We can picture it. My work now is a little bit different. And so the best way to explain it is I am a writer, speaker, and advocate. I write books, among other things. I speak on a variety of topics. I have a podcast, so similar to this. I do lots of speaking, both in person events and then on the podcast or virtual events. And then the advocating part of my work is typically focused in the child welfare space. So a lot of foster care related things. I am a foster parent, but I also just am involved at a state level trying to, well, county, sometimes state level. It depends. We moved about a year ago, and so things are shifting. But basically, yeah, I'm really passionate about using my gifts to hopefully make a difference in the world. And it's so fun, but it is like not a traditional 9 to 5. So it's really weird to tell people what I do. And the question that most people are really wanting to know is like, how do you make money? And I'm like, oh gosh, that's a whole other conversation because there's just so much to it.
Yeah. And I would have to echo that. You do so many different things. And one of the things that you did more recently was launch your book, Soul Care to Save Your Life. And if you didn't do anything else, I think this would be such just prize of your career, probably because it's just chock full with so much of what you've learned and the things you've walked through in your own life. And can you tell us what was the main purpose behind writing this book when you first started out?
Yeah, thank you. That was really sweet. The main reason I wrote that book is I think it's the book that had to come out of me. So there are other books I'm currently working on that I'm really excited about as well. There's such a difference though. That Soul Care to Save Your Life was my first traditional book. And so it reads like a memoir. It reads very much like my story, but we didn't sell it as a memoir. It's not angled that way. It technically is not a memoir. In fact, it is very much angled to be 15 practices of how to care for your soul. So it's a self-help book, for lack of other words. And I wrote it because it's like I wanted to say so many things and teach people so many things based off my own lessons that I learned. But the best way to go about it was to just approach it the way that things happened in my life. The way that they played out in my life was that I hit a rock bottom. And then from there, I learned that nothing matters more than the condition of your soul. And it was upon that realization that I went down just like this long journey. I mean, I'm still on it, right? It's never ending,
Mm-hmm.
but that's essentially the book that I wrote. Was I wanted to write because I would run into so many people, and even someone from high school. I'll just share this like really short story, but I ran into someone from high school, and she said, "Oh my goodness, like it's been a decade or maybe even more at this point, but at least a decade." She's like, "And you, like, I don't even recognize you." And she wasn't talking about the way that I look. I actually still look pretty similar to how I did in high school. I just lay off the tanning beds. But she was talking about I wasn't recognizable in terms of who I became. And I was a little thrown off by it at first. I kind of felt like it was not a compliment, right? Like almost an insult. And I was like, what does that mean? But then she went on to say, it's really beautiful to see the way that you've turned out, like the ways that your life has taken form. And without giving it all away, Soul Care to Save Your Life is the book that I wrote for people who, like me, want a better future than our past, want to not be defined by our past mistakes, but want to be able to break free from that and actually create a new destiny, a new legacy, and make our life meaningful and matter. And it starts with caring for our soul. So that was way long of an answer.
No, I love it. It's so powerful. It starts with caring for your soul. And you mentioned you hit rock bottom. What did that look like? What was that?
Yeah. Rock bottom was when I was newly married to my husband. He's still my husband today. So, spoiler alert, we stay together. But I stepped outside of our marriage and I was unfaithful. And I would say that in itself was a rock bottom. And then I would take it a step further in saying that the fact that I was so ashamed of what I had done And I thought there was no coming back from it. There was no way that we could heal from it or that I could, like, there was just so much shame that I kept it a secret for almost a year. And that secret nearly killed me. It took such an enormous toll on my mental health. And that's where, like, I would say the darkest part of my rock bottom, like the, if I could explain, like, I thought I was at rock bottom when I committed that mistake, when I made that terrible decision, and then keeping it a secret and day after day, like, kind of harboring this guilt and this shame, just it left me isolated. And I felt like that's when I was like on the cold floor of rock bottom. That's the best way for me to describe it. There was, I even write this in the book, but like there were no good days. Like it got to the
Yeah.
point where every day I didn't want to be here anymore.
Hmm. That's a really profound thing to get to that point and to feel that and feel so alone and ashamed. And I'm sure it was just, like you said, such a moment of how do I get out of this? And how did you start to climb out of that? Because like you said, things are good today. So how did you get out of that?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, obviously it's hard to capture it all in a couple of sentences, but here's what I'll say. For me, it came to a point where my mental health, I already, like, genetically and biologically was predisposed to anxiety and depression, and that was already a struggle for me. So then you couple that with a mistake like infidelity and my faith, which I wouldn't say caused more shame, but I would just say the Holy Spirit was kind of like nagging on me, like, you need to confess, you need to confess. Put all that together, and yeah, I was in a really, really bad place. And I didn't want to be here anymore. And it was really as dark as the best way I can explain it is I had suicidal ideations. I thought about what it would be like to not be here anymore. I thought about how I would not be here anymore. And for anyone listening who may be in that place, I'm so thankful we have so many resources, abundant resources available. And so I'm sure you can link those in the show notes. But for me, thankfully, there was a woman in my life who was a mentor of mine. And yeah, through what I would describe a series of Holy Spirit led events, she and I grew so close, and I grew to trust her and to feel safe with her. And I finally one day decided I was either going to end my life or I was going to tell the truth. And when that day came, it felt almost like a random day, but I think it was a Tuesday. I like texted her and it was like, it had to come out of me. So I was like, hey, can you meet me here? Like, I need to talk to you right now. And like, she somehow miraculously was available. We sat down and I just gave like 1,000 disclaimers. Like, I think I said things like, I hope you don't view me like any differently. I hope you don't think this whole time I've been living a lie or a double life. Like, I probably offered so many disclaimers. And then finally, I just blurted it out. Like, I just said, it was a while ago, but I cheated on my husband and I felt so guilty ever since. And I literally don't want to be here anymore because I don't
Mm,
think there's a way out of this. And I screwed up and things will never be the same. And what if I can't even heal from this? What if I'm this person forever? What if I can't even be in a monogamous relationship? Where do I go from here? Right. So I was just in like a total despair.
yeah.
But what I will say is that the minute that confession came out of my mouth out loud to another human being, in that moment, something really divine did happen. And I felt lighter. I
Mm,
felt freer. There was hope. And it's not like my mentor gave me hope. She actually, I would say in a really wise way, she really didn't make any promises or any grand gestures of like, or yeah, grand promises of, he's going to stay with you. This is all going to be fine. Because she couldn't say that.
she
She
didn't
didn't
know.
know.
Yeah.
Right. So in wisdom, she just said, I can't promise you a happy ending, but I can promise you a life worth living. And
Mm,
she of course cared for my mental health and checked in and made sure like I wasn't going to act on a plan, which was super important. And then from there, I think it was just 15 minutes between that conversation and driving to my apartment in Chicago where my husband was home waiting for me. And I said, I walked through the door, I was crying, I looked a hot mess, my armpits were sweaty, and I was just like, I have to tell you something, like I have to get it off my chest and you're going to hate me and you might want to leave me, but I just need to tell you. And I just said it. And it was obviously a very profound moment.
yes.
It was huge.
And in your book, you talk about E's response, Eric's response.
Hmm.
And I think that is such an important piece to this because it was said with a lot of grace. Can you share what that was?
Yeah, the very first thing out of my husband's mouth when I said I cheated on you, and I'll tell you everything, but I have to get this off my chest, and I'm so sorry. I've been harboring it. It's not even recent. It's been almost a year, but I'm not repeating it. Said all these things, and as soon as basically shut up, he said, "But I still love you." And it was just like that. Like there was heartache and heartbreak and devastation and almost this like, how could you? It was almost like a question, but I still love you. And the reason that has never left me, even though the details of the rest of that day and that interaction feel very blurry and fuzzy, and I don't remember a lot, probably because my mind is like repressing it. The reason that has never left me is because it was so profound. It was the first time that in that year I'd been hiding this thing that I'd done and the secret of sin. It was the first time that I felt like what God or through the Holy Spirit had been like kind of whispering to me all along became true. Became true in a tangible way. Like the words of my husband in that moment matched what God had been saying to me all along. Not that God or the Holy Spirit had said like husband's going to stay with you, but just that on the other side of truth, on the other side of this horrible sin, this thing that was literally killing me, that it didn't need to be death. On the other side of that was actually truth and love and grace and mercy. And I want to give a disclaimer because I never want to paint an overly romanticized picture of what confessing something like infidelity in a marriage looks like. It wasn't just that, right? In the days that followed, in the hours that followed, there was yelling, there was cussing, there was, how could you? And I'm angry and I'm sad. And I will never forget the sight of him curled up on the couch, sobbing. I don't ever want to remember that, but I can't erase it from my brain. Like there was real consequences for the behavior. And so, yes, there was grace and mercy and it aligned with God's word. And it was still a really hard journey towards healing for both myself individually and in our marriage as a couple.
Right. And that's what's so powerful too about confession is there are consequences and it's both and, but at the end of it, like you said, it on the other side, it wasn't death. There was life and abundant life that can follow when you're following God's word and moving forward. And so that's just a really powerful thing to realize and realize that this doesn't have to be your life forever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Yes. So in your book, I thought it was really profound, you talking about the root cause of how you came to realize why you were unfaithful to your husband. And can you share a little bit about that and what led you to make those decisions?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that this is coming up because I think nobody wakes up one day and just says, I think today's a good day to screw up my whole life, right? Nobody wakes up one day and says, I think today I'm going to get a DUI, or
Yeah.
I think today I'm going to steal money from my company, or I think today I'm going to gossip about my best friend, or I think today I'm going to cheat on my husband, right? We don't wake up one day. Yes, these are decisions that are made and they're horrible choices, but I just want to like really, for people listening, I hope it's like oh yeah, that's so true. Like nobody wakes up and just decides today's a good day to screw up my life or to make a bad choice that's going to hurt somebody else. However, we get there because we're not living consciously. So what happened is after I made that confession to my husband, we started going to counseling. We were already actually going as a couple, which is really interesting and kind of another layer to this onion. But I needed to start going individually to really dig deeper because I wanted to know. I think I started because I wanted to know, like, could I be healed from this? I realized that I was really addicted to the affirmation of men. And through therapy, it became evident why. It's not an excuse to justify the behavior, by the way. This is just context that is important. When we know ourselves, we can transform, we can change. We don't have to repeat the sins and the behaviors. And so, at the root of my addiction to affirmation from men, which unfortunately was sought outside of my marriage at that point, at the root of it was this unhealed child who wanted
Hmm.
her dad to be in her life, and he wasn't there, who wanted him to be there emotionally, physically, really just in any way. And again, it doesn't mean that everyone who has a has a lack of a father in their life is going to have daddy issues, and it's going to come out the same way mine did. And that's just one example. But like when we don't do our inner work to heal from childhood wounds, it'll show up one way or another in your life. And for me, it showed up as in stepping outside of my marriage and just really enjoying the validation and attention of men at any cost. And so it was really important to get to the root in order to heal.
Yes. Isn't that so interesting too? Because like you said, not everyone will end up with the same issues as they get older. But I do think when you look at a lot of societal issues, there is roots that stem way back to childhood and family upbringing and all of that. And I know you've even talked about that through your foster care platform and all of that, but it's really so true. And I think the fact that that is the case means we do have to offer ourselves and others more grace, because we're just human beings and we're doing the best that we can. Yet at the same time, we do need to have that inner awareness to work on our soul, right? And here's a plug for you, is you do soul care retreats and lots of soul care things for people that want to dig deep and become intentional with their lives and their inner work. Yeah, it's all so powerful.
Yeah, I am so passionate about soul care and when I say soul care, I'm talking about just taking care of the inner parts of yourself that no one else can see. Taking care of that resentment, that bitterness, that envy, that whatever it is, because nobody can see what's motivating you to behave the way that you behave, or what's this context of your childhood that informs the way you show up in the world today. None of us can know that about each other. Only we can know that about ourselves when we look inward and do that work. And one other thing I'll say is that going back to when I said, nobody wakes up and just says, today's a good day to screw up my life. So how does it happen then? Well, I think it happens because it's a series of really small, tiny decisions, tiny yeses along the way that feel seemingly innocent, but ultimately lead to the big thing. For me, it's, you know, flirting back with the person in the coffee shop, just thinking, oh, it's harmless. Like he's just complimenting my dress and I'm just kind of giving him those eyes, being like, thank you, like whatever. For me, it starts like that. For somebody else, it might start by, oh, I'll just have one drink. It's just one drink. For somebody else, it might be, oh, it's just one purchase, right? It can look so different. And so I hope that people who are listening aren't just thinking, this doesn't apply to me. I don't need soul care. Like I'm not in danger of cheating on my spouse, or I'm not even married. It's not about that. Soul care is about caring for the inner parts of yourself that no one else can see. And we all have work to do. No one is exempt. No one is immune to sin. And so that's why, yeah, I offer retreats. I wrote this book. It's so much of my work is rooted in this, because I know that at the end of the day, our follower count on Instagram doesn't matter. Our wardrobe to some extent, it's like, yeah, it matters, but does it really? Like what really matters at the end of the day is that we live a life we're proud of and a life of integrity. And the only way to get there is if we're willing to do the work of caring for our soul.
Yes. Amen. That is very, very powerful. Yes. Okay. So stepping back to sharing about your platform, sharing about your story in your platform, I mean, how did you, like for other people who might have something in their lives that they're wanting to share to help others become intentional with their lives, how did you decide what to share and how to actually share it?
Yeah. This is a hard one because I would not say that everyone needs to blast their stuff on the internet, right? Not everyone needs to write a book about it. So I think we all have to just live within the truth of who we are and who God's created us to be. So for me, I've always been living publicly. So therefore, when it came to this, it was sort of like, well, it's going to be no different. You're going to share this publicly because you kind of share everything publicly. However, wisdom still withholds. So I didn't share it in real time. There was, almost 7 years between things going down and me deciding to share about it publicly, which to some people still wouldn't be enough time. That's okay. We're all different. My husband and I made the decision together for what we felt comfortable sharing. We also were really intentional and took it to people that we felt like were wise counsel in our life as far as how much of the details need to be revealed. What's really worth. We asked ourselves at the end of the day, how can we share this? How can we allow God to use this? Because it's totally a testimony, right? It's totally this thing where I'm like, God has healed me. God has renewed my marriage and restored so many things. How can I tell the world about it? Because to be honest, people are tired of hearing about others proclaiming God's goodness and God's grace if they're not willing to expose what God has brought them out of. and what God has brought them through. Like, don't tell me God's great, but without some context of why. Why is God great? What has God done to change you? How does your life look different because of your relationship with God? That being said, we started to say, well, is this necessary? No, remove it, right? And so we kind of got rid of the stuff that just felt like juicy details that were really just clickbait, drama, whatever, and got to the heart of what needed to be shared. But there's a discernment piece. And my best advice, if when debating on how to share and be vulnerable, is you can't rush it. You need to invite someone wiser, someone that you, maybe someone more seasoned in life, someone who you hold in high regard for one or more reasons to speak into it. And you have to question your motives. What's your motive? Like, if I'm sharing this, I've had people who have accused me along the way of saying, like, that's not something to brag about. Like, why would you brag about cheating on your husband? It's like, wait a second, you think I'm bragging? Like, I'm proud of this? Like, I'm not proud of this. It's really hard to share. I don't want to share it, but I'm willing to go first, because when we get vulnerable, when we expose our junk and reveal God's goodness and glory and all those things, it is powerful. It gives other people permission. It takes people out of isolation and out of shame and hiding and secrecy. And so I want to do for someone what I needed in 2015, when I was struggling and down and out, and no one really knew because I was so good at putting on a mask.
Mm, yes. And let's talk about vulnerability and the power of shame, and also this power of grace through your story, because I know in your book, I've wrote it down because I thought it was so powerful. It says grace transforms the person receiving it, but also the one giving it. And we talked a little bit about how Eric responded to you, but can you shed light a little bit more on like the power that grace in that moment was healing for you, but also for him?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could give a million examples, but that one in particular is an easy an easy one for people to grasp, just because of the weight of the sin and the hurt. But obviously for me, the grace that was given was relief that was palpable. It wasn't relief like, I'm off the hook, I'm just going to go do it again, which I think somewhere along the lines, like, people think like, oh, well, if we give grace, then they'll just think it's okay and they'll just do it again and again. I would actually argue it's the opposite. I would argue that when we feel the need to like reprimand and scold, that puts someone back into a place of shame, to where they're more likely to repeat the cycle. But if we can actually meet them with grace and mercy, and in a way that people from the outside looking in go, that doesn't make any sense, it is beautiful. It is powerful. It is going to change everything. I know, like, for example, with our son, we have a toddler, a little boy. And if I am like, no, Shia, don't do that, that was naughty, he gets very upset. I think he gets very ashamed. Obviously, he's still learning to communicate because he's not even two, but he will do it again. Like, let's say he's hitting or something, he'll just do it again. And I'm like, no, Shia. What I've learned is, if I actually say, like, oh, Shia, that really hurts, like, let's not do that. Mommy, I forgive you, but we're not going to do that anymore, right? Like, taking a totally different approach, a gracious approach, that seems to be much more effective. When we revert to tools of shame, thinking that that's going to change the behavior, it does the exact opposite of what we want. And so, yeah, it's life changing when we receive grace. And then I would also argue that with Eric, like, he would tell you, if he were sitting here today, that yes, we shouldn't ignore or suppress our feelings. Like, he went through the stages of grief, essentially, right? The sadness, the anger, all of the things. And after going through all of that, he chose to forgive and to give grace, and he repeatedly chooses that when this comes back up and he needs to revisit it, because holding on to it like a grudge is actually just harming him. It's not, especially at this point, like, years have passed and I've like moved on, so has he. If he were to, let's say, bring it up when we fight, he doesn't do this, but I know couples that have gone through what we've gone through, and it seems to be like the thing that the spouse throws in the other person's face every time they fight about anything. They could be fighting about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and the way that it's being made, and the other person's like, but you cheated on me years ago, whatever. We haven't experienced that, but when we've talked to couples who are at that place, what we've noticed and what we've tried to speak to them about is that it's not helping. It comes from that phrase, hurt people, right? So they're
Yes.
just reacting from a place of hurt, and there's clearly a wound that still needs to be tended to. But when we show grace, like, it's radical. I think it's why our healing journey for Eric and I, again, we're all still on our own journey. So I'm not saying we're fully healed and we're perfect, But it's why I think we were able to recover as quickly as we were and then move on with our lives. We didn't stay in it for years where he said, but how could you? It's like, feel the feels, deal with it, just like I needed to feel my feelings and deal with it and get help. And I had to like rebuild trust. And that's a whole thing. But also, like, if 5 years from now we're still talking about whether or not you trust me, that's an issue. So there comes a point where it's like, you almost just have to decide, am I going to move forward in grace or not? And that determines, for us, that determined obviously where our marriage went next. And so
Right.
yeah, we chose grace and we have no regrets.
That's wonderful. And the intentionality, I think, shines through all of that, what you've done with your lives and just what I see through your platform too, and how you've continued to grow through that. And it's really important. So, okay, let's switch gears really quickly. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I've seen you speak about different things culturally, and I think you have really unique views. And I think culturally, it's just so prevalent and imperative right now to be able to speak on them. And so one of the things is just the idea of cancel culture. And this is like a whole can of worms probably, but what is your view on cancel culture and how we should engage with things we don't agree with online specifically?
Yeah. Love this question. And, we were just talking about grace. So I think it totally translates into this conversation. I'm a big believer. People who follow me and who have read my book will hear me often say, there isn't a single person we wouldn't love if we knew their story. I really believe that. I believe that when we know the whole story, our hearts are softened, our eyes are opened. We have a little bit of compassion, maybe empathy. It doesn't necessarily mean that it changes our mind about the thing that we disagree with. It doesn't mean that it cancels a mistake and we're just supposed to, turn a blind eye. I'm not saying that, but I think cancel culture is toxic. I think it's wrong. I think it's unhelpful. I think it's doing what we just talked about a little bit ago. It's trying to use shame to advocate for something, and shame isn't a good tool for advocacy in any way. So for example, if you follow a brand and they really screw up and you just cancel them and you're bashing them on the internet and you're throwing away your clothes from there and I guess they're a clothing store. We're just going to go with that. And you're throwing away your clothes from there and I guess I'm curious, like, what do you want to come from that? Because I just
Right.
don't know. Like, if what you want to come from it is for them to learn from the mistake and to do better, I think there's a better way of approaching it. I think you can write an email to the brand and sincerely and wholeheartedly express your concern. I think you can privately say to yourself, I'm going to boycott. I'm not going to shop there anymore. And this is a choice that aligns with my integrity about something. Cool. Do that. But I think if you're going to be someone who publicly proclaims your love for God or the fact that you're a Christ follower, and then in the same breath, you're going to bash and cancel, technically shame, whether it's a human being or a brand ran by human beings, I think we're misrepresenting the gospel. I think we're doing a disservice. And I don't think that if Jesus were here in 2022, 2023, whatever, that he would say, yeah, that's how we should change that. I think Jesus would probably say, what are you doing and why are you doing it?
Yes.
Jesus was
Yes.
also a fan of questions. So that's why I phrased it in a question, right? And so I know that's a long answer, but if you don't like something someone's posting on the internet, am I saying that you have to stay following them forever and ever? No, I don't think so. But one thing I do, and I talk about this in Soul Care to Save Your Life, because I don't just talk about deep things like infidelity, I talk about a wide spectrum of things. And so even on a more surfacey level, when somebody I follow starts to really bother me, I don't like what they're posting or what they're saying, maybe how they're dressing, whatever it is, it's causing a reaction inside of me. The first thing I do is ask myself, why does something that has nothing to do with me causing such a big reaction inside of me? And
Yes.
I sit with it and I look inward and I really wrestle with all of the truth of myself first, because sometimes what comes out is, oh, I think that they're actually showing a part of myself that I don't like. It's like a mirror, and I'm seeing a part of myself like, oh, I feel like they brag a lot. Oh gosh, that's really annoying. And then I sit with it long enough, and I'm like, oh, I think it's a mirror for the very thing in my own self that is not healed or not healthy. Anyways, so all that to say, I just think we need to have discernment, and the way we go about things publicly in particular is really important. And that's why I'm not a fan of cancel culture. I just think it does no good and doesn't actually advocate for change, which is what I think we want when we're canceling someone or company.
Yes, I totally agree. And ultimately, what it's doing is, like you said, making the link to shame. It's shaming other people or brands or what have you. And at the end of the day, it's rather than opening up conversation, it's shutting the door for conversation. And when you do that, you can't move forward at all because it's just a dead end. And like you were saying, reflecting is opening conversation within yourself first to be able to see and then to come to a place of awareness in yourself to then be able to have effective conversations with others. And that's part of why I think it's so harmful, is because it doesn't allow us to move forward in society. It just causes more anger and frustration and divided and polarizing views.
Yeah. Cancel culture treats people like they're disposable. And
Yes.
the reality is, we're all making mistakes. We're all evolving and learning and changing and growing, and we are bound to make more mistakes. The goal is not perfection. And yet, social media has created a space where if you say the wrong thing one time, or you say something that you wholeheartedly believe in the moment, and then later evolve and change your feelings about it, either people don't like what you said initially, or they don't like the direction that you evolve in. You're not going to please everybody,
Yes.
and we shouldn't try to, but it's like, why has the internet created, I'll actually tell you my theories on why. We won't go there, but it's sad that the internet has created a space where it's become so easy to announce, I no longer value anything about you. You are disposable to me. See you later.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
And
It's
with mental
demeaning. Yeah.
Yeah, and with mental health struggles as prevalent as they are, I think this is not helping. It's certainly not making it any better.
Yes. Yes. I agree. So jumping back to your book really quickly before we wrap up, in your book you talk about a gift that you've had that blinds you, and I'm really curious to know what that gift is.
Yeah. I think a lot of us have this gift. It is such a gift. I don't want to give it up. It's a great gift, but it blinds us, and that is the gift of privilege. The gift
Mm,
of privilege is, it can be white privilege, it can be financial privilege, it can be the privilege of a two-parent household. It can be, the privilege can look like a lot of different things. And hopefully by now we all know that privilege does not mean that nothing bad or hard has happened in your life, but that privilege just means that certain things haven't been a barrier. So for me, I'm a white woman. The color of my skin has not been a barrier. It doesn't mean I've never been through anything hard in my life. I have, but I have white privilege. That's one area of privilege that I have. And it is such a gift. I benefit from it, but it blinds us. And what I mean by that is, when we have privilege, it is often very impossible or very difficult, nearly impossible, for us to understand or see the world outside of the context that we know.
yes.
So, my privilege for a long time led me to believe that there was absolutely no excuse, no reason why a woman should ever get an abortion. And I would still to this day say I'm not a fan of abortion. I don't want that for people. I want to live in a world where that no one chooses that. And that's not something that anyone would even need. But because of my experiences as a foster parent, because of my experience being in proximity with people who don't look like me, who don't talk like me, who weren't raised the same way as me, who don't have the same privileges that I have, the proximity to those people has opened my eyes and illuminated, oh my gosh, this whole time I've been blind. I've been blind to the reality of their circumstances. And so it's blinded me from being able to even understand outside my own nose, right? To be able to see past my own little bubble. And so, yeah, privilege is a gift and it blinds us.
That is so true and so powerful, how essentially what you're saying is interacting with others who don't have the same privilege as you have has helped you create this understanding of empathy and what it is like to be in their shoes.
Yeah,
Really, really powerful.
it is. And it goes to so many things, not just abortion. Obviously, I just brought that one thing up, where it's just like I used to see it as such a black and white thing, and I'm like, wait,
Yes.
maybe there is room for gray. Maybe there is this just part of any issue. Take any hot topic
Mm-hmm.
button, hot button issue, and maybe there's something in the gray for us to consider. But yeah, it's taking that. I'll go back to the phrase that I always say, there isn't a single person we wouldn't love if we knew their story. So whoever it is that you have a really hard time liking, a really hard time finding grace for, get to know their story. It might change everything.
Yes, I love that. And I agree with that so wholeheartedly. And one of the things that I say is everyone has a story and the world needs to hear it. And that's the whole premise of this podcast, is being able to create space where we can take those beliefs that we have out of the box and put them in a construct of seeing through others' lives and their eyes and being able to better empathize, and in turn be able to create that space for transformation within ourselves to better change how we view things and how we show up in the world. And I just couldn't agree with that more. So, okay. So last question, if you could have titled your book yourself, what would you have titled it and why?
Yeah. You know, I went through a number of titles. At one point, it was actually titled what we have now as the title of chapter 6, Impressing is Exhausting, because that was sort of my mantra. That's where this all started, was this fake but very felt need to project perfection to the world and to hide anything that wouldn't be perceived as perfect. And then I actually shifted and I was going to title the book. I don't get full decisions on these types of things. When you are traditionally published, you have a whole team that helps you decide. So we landed on Soul Care to Save Your Life, and it very much fits the book. But I do like this question, because another way of looking at it would be if we had gone with a different title that I once had it as a tentative working title, and that was 15 Things Your Friends Aren't Telling You. And people listening may be like, wait, that sounds like a totally different book. Yes, it's the same book, but it's just angled differently. And what I would have done is, instead of writing it as these 15 practices to caring for your soul, which it still is, I would have said, here are the 15 things your friends aren't telling you. You know, you're not aware about this thing, this addiction. We see that you're addicted to affirmation from men, but you don't see it, right? You're not aware of this, right? So it would have taken a totally different angle, a totally different approach. Who knows? Maybe it would have done better. Maybe it would have done worse. But it's fun. Titling a book is so hard, but it is so fun. And ultimately, this is a book about soul care. And I didn't want someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of close friends to be like, well, I don't even have close friends, so what do you mean they aren't telling me things? I thought it was maybe a little too abstract, but it was fun to play around with, to say the least.
Yeah, I love the title of the book, and I think it's very much positioned for anyone who from all walks of life, and it's very open-ended in that way, because we all need to tend to our souls. So very wonderful. Okay, so Manda, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on the Love Light Stories podcast. Like I said, I've followed you for quite a while. I feel like the topics that we care about and want to advocate for are similar, and that's part of why I just had to have you on here, because you have so many good viewpoints and you're so well spoken, and you're able to get those out into the world. So I wanted to be able to let that happen here on the show. And just thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing on this podcast.
Yes. And I want to ask you too, where can people follow you if they want to learn more and keep following along?
Yeah, on everything, I'm Manda Carpenter. So mandacarpenter.com on the internet, on social media, Manda Carpenter. I'm usually on Instagram, so come say hi.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you, Manda. Wow, right? Manda has so many well thought out perspectives that stem from her own life story and experiences. She has a special way of sharing these perspectives too that challenge us to see things differently. And she herself has so much courage to ultimately go from a place of suicidal ideation to confessing her biggest mistake, to doing the hard work and rebuilding her marriage, and then to share it publicly in the hopes that it can help others too. Oof, that takes a lot of courage. Her story truly is a redemption story. What evil meant to end in death, God brought back to life. Did you notice how she said the moment she confessed the sin inside of her, she instantly felt lighter? And then her husband's first reaction was one of grace. I love how she said, on the other side of truth, on the other side of this horrible sin, this thing that was literally killing me, was that it didn't need to be death. That on the other side of that truth was love and grace and mercy. What in your life feels too big to be redeemed? What if, just what if, it wasn't? Manda's story is proof that our deepest, darkest moments can indeed become light once again. And I'm also really happy we had the chance to briefly discuss cancel culture. I specifically asked Manda about her perspective on this because I've seen her stand firm against this type of behavior online, and I know she's often speaking into controversial topics too. I hope her words resonated with you as they did me. I know I don't want to treat people like they're disposable. Do you? Fostering grace is core to what this space is all about. And it's one of my greatest hopes that this community can be a space of grace for you. I hope you'll help me in making it so. Gosh, there's just so much I love about this episode, but you heard it for yourself, so I'll just stop right there. I'm so glad you had a chance to meet Manda. She's definitely worth a follow at Manda Carpenter on Instagram or go to mandacarpenter.com. If you liked this episode, check out Manda's book, Soul Care to Save Your Life. We covered today just a fraction of what she shares in her book. Inside, she details the story of stepping outside her marriage and the soul care practices she discovered that make for a life well lived. It's full of the wisdom and fresh perspective you've probably already come to expect from Manda. And surprise, I love her book so much that I decided to host a book study group just for you, beginning April 18th. During these 4 weeks, you'll be welcomed into a safe space to share your heart, learn, and continue to grow into the person you long to be. We're keeping this study small and intimate, so make sure to snag a spot right away. Go to stephaniemjacobs.com/Manda for more details. Did this episode touch your heart? If you loved today's story and have a relatable experience to share, encouraging words for our guests, or just want to share a comment, go to the show notes for this episode and send us what we like to call heart mail for a chance to have your note featured on an upcoming episode. If there's a large response to any particular story, we might just bring that guest back on the show to dive into your comments, or even have them join us as a guest in the Love Light Stories Facebook community. It's as easy as sending us a voice message or written note, both easily accessible in today's show notes. Simply go to stephaniemjacobs.com and click on the Stories tab. So, give it a try. Send us your heart mail. I just can't wait to hear what's on your heart. And hey, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.